When you think of great British chocolates, there's one name that everyone knows.
Cadbury's.
Cadbury's.
Cadbury.
Cadbury's.
With almost 200 years of history, Cadbury is one of the nation's best-selling brands.
Cadbury's, bastion of Britishness.
It's a national treasure with classic colours.
I think you're hard-pressed to find any British person who wouldn't say it's their favourite chocolate.
People always think of Cadbury Dairy Milk. They think of purple coloured wrappers.
In this programme, we'll meet the people who help make the Cadbury magic. The stars.
Being the milk tray man is the next best thing to being James Bond. It's fantastic.
Why is it that people remember the flake ad over other ads?
We'll meet the workers.
I came to work at Cadbury in 1955 and I absolutely loved it.
And the chocolate dream makers.
There's lots of Willy Wonkers here in Bourneville, but I'm one of the Willy Wonkers, yeah.
For the first time ever, we are about to go inside Cadbury. Today, Cadbury is a £12 billion company, selling chocolate in more than 40 countries, from India through to Australia. Its chocolate has taken over the world, but it all began here in Britain. The beating heart of this global operation is located in Bourneville, near Birmingham. It's here the company built not just a great factory on a greenfield site, but a workers' utopia with cricket pitches in front and its own village behind. For almost 140 years, this is where the taste of Britain has been made, by people like Duncan Elliott.
15 production lines here at Bourneville. They run 24/7 and we make about 150 different products. We aim to make up to 350 tonnes of Cadbury Dairy Milk chocolate a day. 85% plus of what we make is for the UK market.
The Bourneville site has over 2,000 employees, including office workers and factory workers. It also boasts Cadbury World, a popular tourist attraction, bringing in some 3,000 visitors a day. The first Cadbury shop opened 5 miles away in the centre of Birmingham back in 1824, right here on Bull Street. The man behind it, John Cadbury.
It all began for John Cadbury in Bull Street in Birmingham. He set up store with plate glass windows set in polished mahogany. Now, that was different to most of the other shopkeepers that had old-fashioned green ribbed glass windows. And within the shop, it was like an Aladdin's cave.
Although John Cadbury had been born into a wealthy family, it was his religious beliefs that propelled him to found a business that would change the world.
John was a Quaker, and what he wanted to do was to be able to help other people through his business. And he had worked extensively with the poor, with people in the inner city in Birmingham.
Founded in the mid-1650s, Quakers were viewed as a threat to the establishment, and as a result, suffered persecution and oppression.
They had been excluded from universities, excluded from civil life, and so they took their aspirations and their brilliant minds and applied them to business.
As a Quaker, business for John was about much more than just creating profit.
The Cadbury family was infused with a sense of social responsibility. They believed that through their business, they could improve the social well-being of many people throughout Birmingham and elsewhere.
Just like many other cities in Victorian society, Birmingham was in desperate need of improvement.
The living conditions faced by poorer people were horrendous. Their sanitation was almost non-existent. Cesspits for lavatories, no drainage, no sewers, no clean water. It was hard. It was very, very hard for the poor.
To escape the brutal drudgery of life in the slums, many turned to alcohol. Gin, known as mother's ruin, was the poison of the inner cities, and for many it led not just to alcoholism, but child death, starvation, and suicide.
Alcoholism was unbelievably destructive in inner cities. It's hard for us to understand today.
As a result, John Cadbury was on a mission to save the world from the demon drink.
What he really wanted was to create a nutritious alternative to alcohol, and he thought that cocoa would be that alternative because cocoa had a reputation as a health drink.
The drink cocoa, which he sold as cocoa essence, would become the saviour of society and the beginning of the Cadbury dream. But there was just one problem.
They had what they believed to be a really quality product, but would it just sell itself? That had been the traditional belief. It would just sell itself. But how do you market that product?
Back then, most Quakers were against advertising, but the Cadbury family decided that if cocoa essence was to change the world, then the world would have to know it existed. So the first Cadbury adverts began to appear in the 1860s. Over a century later, Sarah Foden is in charge of the company's archives.
Cadbury's Cocoa Essence was launched in 1866, and it was this one single product that actually changed the company from a small family business into the vast global brand that we know as Cadbury today.
And this unprecedented growth gave the Cadbury family the opportunity to put their ideas into practice on the biggest scale yet.
They knew they had to move. They therefore looked around for a site on the outskirts of Birmingham which would give them the ability to expand their business and to build a new, modern factory. The location of Bourneville was enhanced by its excellent transport links. Bourneville was right by a major railway, and increasingly the railway connection became important.
With such attractions, it was no surprise that the Cadbury business expanded even further to create the utopian village of Bourneville. Today, it's home to 25,000 people and often cited as one of the nicest places to live in the UK. But back in the 19th century, it was just a dream.
The whole idea was really to try to show how you could create a new life and still have a very successful business.
The first bricks for the Bourneville factory were laid in January 1879, and most importantly, 16 houses for Cadbury employees were built on the site.
They built the homes that gave enough land for each man to cultivate their gardens. There was so much emphasis on education. There were lessons in arts and crafts, sewing, gardening, cooking, real practical skills.
And from the very beginning, it was clear that the Cadbury vision of a better society had become reality.
If you take 6 to 12-year-old children in Birmingham, the children in Bourneville were 2 to 4 inches taller than their counterparts in the centre. Their weight was 9 pounds more. So in a sense, the outcome of what they did was to improve the quality of life of people.
They were revolutionary. These were enormous steps forward. The leading edge of beginning to say, the way we look after people is fundamental to our society and actually is fundamental to a good business.
And today, Bourneville still remains a close community with strong ties to the Cadbury factory. Cynthia and Trevor, who worked at the factory as a relief check weigher and as a chocolate grinder, have lived together in Bourneville for 58 years.
All around Bourneville is loads of green. It's a magical place. My father worked at Cadbury's, my mother, my husband, my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law who lived next door to us.
Bourneville School, 1942. Me. And that was during the wartime.
Our 4 boys went to the same school. Trevor's brother and his wife both worked there, and Len was a big footballer in his younger days.
And he signed for Birmingham as an amateur. A few weeks later, Chelsea had spotted him and offered him a contract with Chelsea, but he turned it down because he was earning more money at Cadbury's than he could have done at Chelsea.
Built by the sense of community and, of course, its cocoa essence, Bourneville blossomed. By 1895, nearly 2,000 staff worked at the factory. But just as it looked like things couldn't get any better, a new product from Europe was about to threaten the Cadbury dream. Today, the Cadbury factory makes around 5 million bars of its ever-popular dairy milk every week. And it's rated one of the nation's favourite chocolate products.
Good taste, nice on the palate.
Yeah, that's the one. Smoothness, I suppose. It's always been the thing with dairy milk, smooth.
But dairy milk hasn't always been a staple of Cadbury's chocolate. It was produced in response to an invasion from Switzerland back in the 1880s.
In the late 19th century, the Swiss began to flood the British market with something totally new. It was milk chocolate, and it was creamier, richer, sweeter than anything the British consumer had tasted before.
Everybody was trying to make this milk chocolate bar because they knew that people would want it, and everybody wants to be first because it's a competitive world.
If Cadbury was to survive, then it was going to have to come up with a chocolate just as good. And the task of creating it fell to this man, George Cadbury Jr.
It was hugely complicated to make milk chocolate because the water in the milk doesn't sit comfortably with the fat in the cocoa butter. And so if you don't get it exactly right, you can end up with a lumpy mess, you know, with the fat going rancid, you know, too powdery and dry.
In all, it took George years to crack the magic recipe. His victory was Cadbury Dairy Milk. Even though the company makes tons of milk chocolate every day, the exact recipe is still a closely guarded secret. A secret known only to a select few, such as Head of Innovation, Dave Shepherd.
We take liquid milk from the local farms, we mix that with cocoa and sugar in our secret recipe and method, and that makes crumb. And then that crumb is ready to be used and shipped here into Bourneville, where we add cocoa butter and a few other extra ingredients, and then actually Cadbury Dairy Milk is made.
Whatever the secret recipe, one thing is known. The key ingredient is good quality British milk.
Their first idea was to call it Dairy Made, and they sent it out to the shops for trials. And one shopkeeper wrote in and said, "Why don't you call it Dairy Milk? That's a much better name." And they agreed.
And it is Cadbury brand manager Benazir Barlett Batada who knows what an integral part of Cadbury's history the milk chocolate edition proved to be.
It was a milk chocolate that was milkier than any of the other competitors out there due to the addition of a glass and a half of fresh British milk, and this was full-fat cream milk.
Initially, sales were slow, but Dairy Milk's taste soon won over the nation, going on to become Cadbury's bestseller.
With certain brands, you have the master brand, and then they're what are called sub-brands. So with Ford, you've got the master brand, and then you've got the Ford Galaxy, Ford Mondeo. And with Cadbury, you have the master brand of Cadbury, but some of their sub-brands have become so powerful in their own right, that they're almost as strong or stronger than the master brand. Dairy milk being a perfect example.
The glass and a half was very important. I mean, it was so strongly identified with the brand, you didn't need the name. You just could say glass and a half, and everyone knew you were talking about dairy milk.
We might recognise the taste of George Cadbury's dairy milk today, but we wouldn't recognise the wrapper.
This is one of the very early original packs for Cadbury Dairy Milk. So you can see it's slightly more lilac in colour than the purple that we know today, and it's got a milk pail in the centre of it. The colour purple that we recognise today started to come in on the brand around 1914.
Cadbury Purple is absolutely iconic, and it even has its own Pantone colour reference number.
If I was to go in the street now and ask people to say, think chocolate and think a colour, so many people would say purple. That's one hell of an achievement for a brand.
Since its inception in 1905, the bar has been reshaped, relaunched and reborn in 33 countries and into more than 23 varieties. But of course, the Cadbury story didn't stop there. For the next 113 years, Cadbury would innovate, inspire, and introduce countless new products. The Roaring '20s being the decade when many of our favourites were born. Fruit and Nut, Crunchy, and later, Roses. And everyone has a favourite.
My favourite is a Whisper. I like these twirls.
I like the Whisper. I like cream egg.
Including Cadbury's famous workers.
That's easy. I'm old school. Hold up.
I actually love Twirl.
I do love a bar of Whisper and I love Twirl bites.
What few people realise is that Mr. Willy Wonka himself, Roald Dahl, may have had a hand in the creation of some of those iconic brands.
Roald Dahl's second book for children from 1964 was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and clearly it was inspired by his experiences as a chocolate taster back in his school days at Repton.
As a schoolboy at boarding school in the 1930s, Roald was part of a select group of boys who were sent some very exciting packages.
It's this incredible story that he writes about in Boy Tales of Childhood. Every now and again, a plain grey cardboard box was dished out to each boy in our house. And this, believe it or not, was a present from the great chocolate manufacturers Cadbury. Inside the box, there were 12 bars of chocolate, all of different shapes, all with different fillings, and all with numbers from 1 to 12 stamped in the chocolate underneath. Also in the box was a sheet of paper with the numbers 1 to 12 on it, as well as 2 blank columns, one for giving marks to each chocolate from 0 to 10, and the other for comments. What Roald realised was that with these new bars coming through, somewhere in the Cadbury factory there must be an inventing room for chocolate. Somewhere, some terrifically clever people were thinking about how can we make a more exciting chocolate bar.
Just as Dahl had imagined, there really is an inventing room at Cadbury, and it's run by Head of Innovation, Dave Shepherd.
There's lots of Willy Wonkas here in Bourneville, but I'm one of the Willy Wonkas, yeah. Best thing about the job? 2 things, really. The first time you see your creation coming off the factory line, and then the second time is when you see it appear on the shelf as well. So, you know, I love going along the supermarket shelf, looking and seeing if somebody is taking your new invention off the shelf.
By the late 1940s, Cadbury was by far the largest chocolate maker in the country. But more importantly, the company was still based on the business ideals of the early Cadburys. Like Mr. Wonka's factory, it truly was a wonderful place to work.
I came to work at Cadbury in 1955, and I couldn't get into the offices because I don't think they thought I was bright enough, but I was quite good at maths, so I went as a relief check weigher, and I absolutely loved it. There was a doctor's, a nurse, if you ever needed, a dentist. They would always be there for you.
But if Cadbury Dairy Milk had created a world-class company, an event that occurred in September 1955 helped create an empire.
Tonight, 7:15, September 22nd, 1955. Studios, staff and technical equipment have all been assembled. A new public service is about to be launched over the rooftops of old London.
ITV, the UK's first commercial channel, was launched. And with it, Cadbury's very first TV ad.
I've got it. You both like Cadbury's drinking chocolate.
That's right. They both like Cadbury's drinking chocolate. The luxury evening drink. Yet it costs only 1 7 for a big half-pound tin. Remember, it's Cadbury's.
This new medium of reaching your audience in their own homes would revolutionize Cadbury and the marketing world.
Advertising really only became important once people had televisions. And then advertising, almost overnight, they found that one good advertising campaign could erode a century of loyal trading with shopkeepers across the country, and the advertising really mattered.
You're in luck. Yes, you're in luck. Because here come Lucky Numbers, the new all-chewy assortment made by Cadbury's. Over a dozen...
By 1958, commercials accounted for more than 60% of all Cadbury's chocolate advertising.
When I was growing up, Cadbury's advertising was very much part of your sort of your media experience, particularly your TV viewing experience. The Cadbury's ads. I mean, even now I can sing them. You know, they were very much part of my experience growing up.
Cadbury, with the help of the new airways, grew exponentially. In the boom years that followed, Cadbury's slogans would become some of the most famous in history.
Nuts or hazelnuts. Shut up!
But within a few years, Britain's favourite chocolate brand was all over our screens for a very different reason.
Salmonella was found in liquid chocolate, and that liquid chocolate was transported around the factory and made into a number of different products.
Remember milk chocolate when it was creamy and smooth and came in big, thick chunks? Well, Cadbury is like chocolate used to be.
By the 1970s, Cadbury was a truly global brand.
If you never tasted Cadbury, you haven't tasted great chocolate.
Its dominance was based not just on its mega brands like Dairy Milk, but on the iconic advertising that drove sales ever higher. If the Cadbury family had tentatively dipped a toe into the world of advertising in the 1860s, a century later, the company had well and truly plunged into the deep end.
Everyone's a fruit and a nut case. It keeps you going when you toss the cable.
Cadbury over the years has had some of the nation's best loved ad campaigns, and within those there was real sort of personality. Some might say some of those campaigns were a little eccentric, but likeable and lovable for that.
We make these up as we go along, you know.
When I was growing up, Cadbury's was this really iconic British brand that spoke to me as a young child, particularly in the 70s. It really played on the Britishness and being a British sense of humour, British kind of music and songs, and it was very lively.
Nuts or hazelnuts.
The ads were a clear success, with sales of fruit and nut and whole nut rocketing by 73% during the early 70s, saturating the chocolate market. But the chocolate wars continued, with Cadbury and its competitors creating dozens of new brands throughout the 70s and 80s.
The companies that have been around for so long, and they're very competitive between each other. They'll try and copy each other's products and do things that are similar. So through the 70s in particular and some of the 80s, we saw a lot of new product development, and people were trying to be like, oh, that's working for them, let's do our version.
But Cadbury would always have a unifying factor that would ensure its brand stood out from the competition.
Cadbury's has always been really smart at branding all of its different chocolate ranges with the Cadbury name, which is very much a modern marketing technique, but they've been doing it for years. So whether it was a Whisper or the Cadbury's cream eggs, or we always knew it was Cadbury because Cadbury was always right there in the marketing.
After dairy milk, one of Cadbury's most iconic brands is its famous cream egg. First produced in 1923 as the whipped cream egg. It's been a favourite ever since.
Lovely Cadbury's milk chocolate.
And to keep the nation hooked, Cadbury's only produce their cream egg between January and Easter.
Cadbury's cream eggs are in your shops now.
It's quintessentially British, it's very Eastery, yeah, and it's an egg.
It's just like one of those things that everyone knows about, everyone loves.
It's very sweet and it's indulgent, but it's, you know, we're entitled to moments of decadence, and this is it.
The cream egg is a true marketing triumph, with more than 200 million sold in the UK every year, and about 1 million eggs made daily at Cadbury. Cadbury's adverts may have brought them decades of success, but there will always be one campaign that everyone remembers for its stiff upper lip, chiseled face, and good old-fashioned romance.
Oh, this is amazing. It really takes me back. The stuntman's jumped onto the crane, he's flying around. And then I jump off my box.
And all because the lady loves milk tray.
Being the milk tray man is the next best thing to being James Bond. Fantastic.
Cadbury's milk tray had been introduced in 1915, but the arrival of the milk tray man in 1967 would really put this assortment box on the map.
They conveyed this air of mystery and romance, and sort of positioned the milk tray as a quite exotic luxury. You never actually even saw the chocolates in the campaign. And of course, the milk tray man, he was this dynamic James Bond type figure, a little bit Mills and Boon as well, I think, a sort of schlocky romance hero.
I was an actor at the time, a working actor, but when it came up as a commercial and as a possible job, it was terrific. Everybody wanted to be the milk tray man.
And all because the lady loves milk tray.
My mum, especially, was delighted. She thought that was the pinnacle of my career. Anything else sort of paled into insignificance, really, by it. And I remember on my wedding day, when I was walking down the aisle, I heard somebody whisper, as we were walking out, rather, with my wife, it's the milk tray man. So I'd arrived, obviously.
One of 7 actors to play the milk tray man, James Coombs' 1987 advert would contribute to the success of this firm Cadbury favourite. Today, 8 million boxes are sold in the UK every year.
And all because the lady loves milk tray.
The milk tray man would depart from our screens in 2003 for a well-deserved break.
Do you want to see any more?
But James Coombs would be back in 2015 in the search for a new Man in Black.
Please get me a G&T. I'm not sure that chocolate's going to cut it.
Spence, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah?
I hope one day you will too.
If the milk tray man captured the Britishness of Cadbury with his stiff upper lip, then the flake girl was looking to use lips to convey a very different message.
Why is it that people remember the flake ad over other ads?
The Cadbury flake was developed in 1920 and discovered by chance when a Cadbury employee noticed that streams of excess chocolate cooled into flaky ripples.
Only the crumbliest, flakiest chocolate
My heart's banging and I feel a little bit embarrassed. It's like yesterday and 400 years ago all at once. Oh, this bit I definitely can't watch.
Cadbury's Flake, the crumbliest, flakiest milk chocolate in the world.
I remember at the time when my agent sent me for this TV commercial, and I was ever so poorly. I had pharyngitis, and I literally stumbled into the casting director's office, very, very sort of hazy and worn out, and they asked me to bite into the top of a pen. They wanted to see, I guess, how my lips worked, I don't know. So just like, bite this pen, pretend it's a flake. My agent said it was like a huge deal, this commercial, but I just don't think I realised how much of a big deal it was.
Filmed in South Africa for 2 weeks back in 1985, the advert would go on to run for 6 years, becoming the longest-running flake advert of all time.
I made an awful lot of commercials. I probably made about 50 or so, but, I mean, everybody remembers the flake above everything.
After 182 years, Cadbury was one of the most trusted, safe, and much-loved brands in the UK. But in 2006, deep within one of its factories, disaster struck.
If you look behind me, you can see the plant where a leaking pipe introduced contamination.
The dirty water seeped into the ingredients for the company's most important product, Cadbury dairy milk.
Salmonella was found in liquid chocolate, and that liquid chocolate was transported around the factory and made into a number of different products.
As a result, at least 40 people fell ill with salmonella, and the company were forced to recall a staggering 1 million chocolate bars. Cadbury was issued with a record-breaking £1 million fine, and the product recall cost the company a further 20 million, as well as the faith and trust of the British people.
Major product recalls, if you have an issue that's to do with the safety of the product, they can absolutely be the death knell of that product or brand.
The product recall caused Cadbury sales to drop 14%. They were in need of a saviour, and it would come from an unlikely source.
You've got a strong brand, backed up by decades, and in Cadbury's case, a century or more of brilliant marketing. You can weather a blip like a salmonella outbreak or a bad PR story. You can.
You can either say, no, the best thing we need to do is just lay low, do nothing, stay out of the limelight. The other alternative is to say, no, we need to sort of rebuild the relationship with consumers. My focus, the focus of the team, was to, as we called it, get the love back.
Getting the love back for Cadbury would involve commissioning one of the most radical adverts seen in recent years.
I said to them I wanted an ad that was as enjoyable to consume as a bar of Cadbury chocolate. So in many respects, that was the spiritual brief for the advertising campaign.
The reality was an advert so radical that it would be impossible to ignore. Perhaps the greatest ever seen.
I remember after seeing or hearing this script, just grinning like a school kid and turning to one of my colleagues, and he was doing the same, and we just looked at each other and said, people have got to see this. We open on a purple screen, and as the viewer, you're not quite sure what's going on. And all the while, the Phil Collins In the Air Tonight music is playing. The camera moves out to slowly reveal full-blown drum kit, and not just any old drum kit, but a huge, great big drum kit. And at that point, he does the In the lyrics, it talks about he's been waiting for this moment all his life, and I think as a viewer, you can really relate to that sort of air guitar moment.
If the nation's affection for Cadbury had wavered after the salmonella scare, then Gorilla, as the advert would be known, had well and truly won them back.
The ad performed phenomenally well. More than 20 million people viewed it on YouTube. And on the back of that, Cadbury aired it in Canada, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand.
The gorilla ad could have been an ad for anything, really. It was just a brilliant piece of branded entertainment, and they managed to wrap a Cadbury-ness around it.
I have the dubious pleasure of helping Phil Collins return to #1 in a number of different markets, so depending on whether you like his music or not, that's either a good thing or a bad thing.
Gorilla would well and truly restore the public's faith in Cadbury. But it wouldn't be long before the British brand would have another fight on its hands. A fight that had the potential to end 186 years of independence for this great institution. For almost 200 years, the magic of chocolate had its roots in one place, Bourneville, the home of Cadbury. More than just a factory, this was an employer that cared for its workers with its model village that even today is considered one of the nicest places to live in Britain. But then, in 2009, the Americans arrived with a hostile takeover bid from multinational conglomerate Kraft Foods. Suddenly, all that was good about Cadbury, all that was good about Britain, seemed under threat.
Cadbury is an iconic British name. It's associated with so many positive British qualities. The vast majority of people at some stage in their lives will have eaten Cadbury products. It's part of the fabric of Britain, and that's why people were worried.
Even Cadbury's famous on-screen stars were concerned.
I did feel sad. I did, because I felt like it was such a sort of English, British staple, such an institution, and that, oh, do you know, that's a shame.
I think everyone was very worried about it at the time. I think there was a huge uproar about it. And I think mainly because it is so British. It's so nostalgic. It's Rolls-Royce. It's milk tray. It's Cadbury.
Former Cadbury bosses, too, were wary of just how devastating a takeover could be to the brand.
The relationship that UK consumers had with the Cadbury brand was quite special. It enjoyed a strength of feeling that was greater than most, and I think that's because people have grown up with the brand, and so the prospect of something happening to that and maybe some of that Britishness being lost, that's something that people were worried about.
But in the business world, it's money that talks. And with Kraft's £10.2 billion offer on the table, the battle was well and truly underway.
Takeovers can often be seen as a kind of commercial warfare, a battle between opposing camps, big companies led by their chief executives, who are the generals, surrounded by lawyers, accountants, bankers, people like that.
And whilst the bankers and lawyers fought the Battle of Bourneville in the boardrooms, on the streets, the spirit of Britain rose up in anger.
I only lived 2 miles down the road, and I thought, I've got to get involved in this one. So I went down there, and I spent every day there. And what seemed weeks, you know. Cadbury's bastion of Britishness. I want to preserve all things that are British as much as I possibly can.
Even hardened money men like financial journalist Jonathan Guthrie were concerned that the heart and soul of Cadbury might be lost.
I lived in Bourneville at the time. I was a reporter for the Financial Times, and I lived a few hundred yards from the plant. For most of the workers, they hadn't a clue what was going on. They felt that they were in the dark, and they were very worried about what the outlook was. I felt very concerned because the factory was the centre of the community, and there was a sense that this could be a very big change.
But ultimately, the shareholders took the money, and on the 18th of January 2010, the deal was done. Kraft, the American supergiant, had purchased Cadbury for a staggering £12 billion.
All the Quaker businesses, and Britain led the world in chocolate confectionery. For over a century, Britain pioneered the recipes, and it was British confectionery that was leading the world. But now all those family firms have been swallowed up by global enterprises.
It almost seemed like an earthquake had shaken the whole country. It was almost like everybody had an opinion and everybody was concerned for the future of Cadbury.
A few years post-takeover, Kraft changed its name to Mondelez and set about reassuring the chocolate lovers of Britain that their favourite brand was safe in their hands. And they did it with the use of their secret weapon, a Miss Wonka in the form of Hayley Curtis and her £1 million tongue.
My tongue's insured for £1 million. There were some strange things on the insurance policy that I couldn't do. I can't eat spicy foods, but I think it's like Vindaloo level, so I'm all right with a Balti.
Hayley's job as the nation's taste tester means she is responsible for ensuring every Cadbury product stays true to George Cadbury's secret chocolate recipe of over 100 years ago.
Before we have tastings at work, we can't eat anything that's quite polarising. So if you have mints before you have a tasting, or if you have a coffee, then it will really dilute the way that you interpret the sensory profile of the chocolate. So you have to be really careful on what you eat.
And it is Hayley's £1 million tongue, along with the 300-strong research and development team, that ensure Cadbury are always one step ahead.
We are always looking at maybe new taste combinations that go well with our chocolates. Things like, salt and sea salts, maybe a few years ago was quite a niche, is now actually more of a mainstream ingredient.
It's not just new flavours which the company look to launch.
We've innovated on technologies like Cadbury Dairy Milk Oreo, bringing fresh tastes, and bringing back old favourites like Cadbury Dairy Milk Tiffin.
If Cadbury's team of Willy Wonkers was not enough to reassure the nation that their chocolate was in safe hands, then Cadbury would once again turn to advertising to save the day.
I'd like a bar of chocolate, please. It's for my mum.
The latest campaign shines a light on those everyday acts of kindness, acts of generosity, human acts of connection. It is all about the brand going back to its generous roots, its real spirit of generosity.
Your change.
Happy birthday, Mum.
It's a real return to Britishness. That ad could not run in any other market. It is so rooted in our market here, and that is a return to old form for Cadbury.
And it is this return to the traditions of Cadbury which the company endeavours to continue.
We do feel it's a special family business. We have people who've been in generations of manufacturing who have a real affinity with it because of the history and the legacy of the family.
Today, Cadbury might be a part of an American multinational, but for many, even those who feared the worst, it's still a British icon of which we can be proud.
To Cadbury's I say, good health, and may God bless it, and long may it continue. Cheers.
Tuck into some Sunday night romance tonight. Emilia Clarke stars in the network premiere of Me Before You at 9. First, time for some sweets here on Channel 5. Grab another sugar fix as we reveal Britain's favourite sweets. Brand new next.